What if I told you that the most alarming thing about the Brazilian Grand Prix was not Hamilton's accident, but what Ferrari discovered in his car hours later? Something that could completely change your season. The day at Interlagos started like any other on the Formula One calendar, but from the first lap of the 2025 Brazilian Grand Prix, everything that could go wrong for Lewis Hamilton went even worse. At first glance, the incident seemed like another of many frictions in an aggressive start. But the reality was much more complex and with consequences that continue to be analyzed even weeks later. Turn 1 of the Jose Carlos Pace circuit is known for its late braking and multiple marking lines, making it a natural trap for millimeter errors. It was precisely there where the debacle began. Carlos Sainz's Williams, which had been launched after a determined start, lightly touched the left rear of Hamilton's SF25. A seemingly minor contact, almost insignificant at running speed. However, that initial friction immediately destabilized the Ferrari's aerodynamic balance. It was not a simple push. It was the beginning of a structural collapse. What followed was a sequence that reflected a car committed from most basic. Hamilton, who had already been dealing with an extremely balance-sensitive SF25, lost grip in a critical area of the circuit. With the car out of alignment and the downforce already altered, he tried to stay competitive. But the next blow came before he completed his first turn. In the middle of the main straight, while struggling to keep the car under control, he found himself in the slipstream of Franco Colapinto's Alpine. Without clear references, and probably affected by undiagnosed damage at the time, Hamilton braked late. The result was a direct impact against the rear of the Argentine car. This second crash was visually more dramatic, but the most serious thing occurred right after. The SF25's front wing completely detached and became trapped under the flat bottom of the car. And this changed everything, because it was not only a broken piece, but a fundamental element that, when embedded, altered the distribution of air under the car. The Ferrari immediately lost all ability to generate ground effect, becoming completely unpredictable in high-speed corners. What followed was an impossible struggle on Hamilton's part to return to the pits with a car that no longer obeyed his commands. The chaos intensified in the Ferrari garage. Engineers could not believe the data they were receiving in real time. Aerodynamic load losses exceeding 35 points, erratic variations in the pressure of the flow channels, and an abnormal temperature in the rear suspension system. As they analyzed the telemetries, they realized that this was not a common situation. And the most alarming thing of all is that the car had shown signs of instability even before the first contact with Sainz. But at that time, everything was interpreted as a consequence of the crash. Nobody yet imagined that the Interlagos incidents were about to uncover an underlying technical defect, much more serious, and with implications that could extend to the entire SF25 project. Ferrari was not only watching its star driver abandon the race, it was witnessing, without knowing it, the collapse of one of the pillars of its car. And as Hamilton emerged from the car, frustrated but apparently unharmed, an investigation began in the engineering room that would reveal a structural problem that had been hidden in plain sight for several races. Interlagos was not just the scene of abandonment. It was the breaking point of a car that, from its conception, already had a lethal defect in the hours after Hamilton abandoned the Brazilian Grand Prix. The atmosphere in the Ferrari pit changed from bewilderment to deep technical concern. The mechanics accustomed to dealing with race damage began with the usual disassembly and diagnosis procedures of the car. But they quickly realized that SF25 didn't have a simple surface break. There was something wrong, a series of anomalous patterns that even real-time data had not been able to accurately predict. It was then that the detailed structural inspection protocol was activated, an analysis that is normally only carried out in Maranello, but that in this case was accelerated in an extraordinary way due to the magnitude of the inconsistencies detected. What they found in that technical process was, in the words of one of the engineers, one of the most worrying discoveries in recent years of Ferrari chassis development. A microfracture almost imperceptible to the naked eye was detected in the left rear suspension arm. It was not the type of damage that appears after a strong blow, but rather a crack due to material fatigue developed progressively over multiple running sessions. A defect that had gone unnoticed in each previous review, and that was only exposed thanks to the brutal combination of impacts and mechanical stress experienced in Interlagos. The most disturbing thing was what this discovery implied. Under normal conditions, the suspension arm supports enormous lateral loads, especially in high-speed cornering. If there is an internal crack, even if it is microscopic, that arm can give millimeters without breaking completely, but generating subtle and constant alterations in the angle of inclination of the wheels. In other words, the car changes geometry in real time, but chaotically. And that explains why Hamilton had reported, since free practice in Brazil, a feeling of instability that the team was unable to replicate even in the most aggressive simulations. The next step was the cross-telemetric analysis. Ferrari studied lateral load sensors, weight distribution, variability of braking points, and stability in corner exit acceleration. The results showed random oscillations in the chassis pressure and deformation readings. In other words, there were times when the SF-25 literally danced when cornering, with no way for the pilot to anticipate it. That not only compromised performance, but represented a safety risk if the part were to collapse completely at high speed. But the fracture in the suspension was not the only technical problem. The damage caused by the front wing being trapped under the car generated a chain reaction in the aerodynamic architecture. The side skirts responsible for sealing the air under the floor of the car and enhancing the ground effect were severely deformed. This completely interrupted the laminar flow under the car, generating internal turbulence that further destabilized the flat bottom pressure. In essence, the car went from having an aerodynamically coherent platform to becoming a constant source of instability. Engineers also noticed that the cooling system ducts under the car's floor partially collapsed due to the embedded spoiler. This not only raised the internal temperatures of the hydraulic system, but also altered the distribution of air flow to the rear brakes, causing a drop in the efficiency of the braking system, something that was reflected in the traceability of the pedal. Hamilton applied the force correctly, but the response was lower than usual. The most shocking thing was to discover that some of these problems were not totally new. Reviewing data from previous races, technicians detected similar, although less pronounced, wobble patterns in GPS and telemetry from Canada, Belgium, and Zandvoort. In retrospect, everything indicated that this microfracture had been present for more than 3 races, slowly worsening until reaching Brazil, where he simply collapsed under the pressure. Ferrari now faced a technical crossroads. Was it a single defective part, or was there a structural design problem with the SF-25? The investigation not only focused on repairing the damaged car, but also on checking the parts of Leclerc's chassis and the rest of the batch manufactured in the same batch. Because if this failure was not isolated, the 2025 project could be compromised before the 4th race. This type of discovery completely redefines a team's perception of its own car. It is not simply about adjusting a strategy or fine-tuning aerodynamics. Here we are talking about reviewing the car's structural foundations. To ask again if the data that has fed months of simulations of wind tunnels, of suspension design, is reliable or is contaminated by a defective part that was silent until everything collapsed. The discovery of the microfracture in Hamilton's SF-25 after the Brazilian Grand Prix not only represented a specific problem, it was, for Ferrari, a structural warning that shook the foundations of the technical project for the 2025 season. What until then had been interpreted as an unfortunate incident in the race became the trigger for a complete review of the design approach, quality control, and reliability of the car. And in modern Formula One, where every technical failure turns into an avalanche of consequences, Ferrari knew that what they had discovered could not be ignored. First of all, the discovery of this microfracture generated an internal crisis in the engineering department. It wasn't just the faulty suspension arm that was worrying, but everything it could entail at the production level. The crack detected had signs of having begun its degradation process during previous events, which forced the team to review not only the Hamilton components, but also those of Leclerc, and especially the entire batch of parts built in that same phase of the SF-25 project. An audit protocol was put in place that temporarily halted production of new suspension arms while the manufacturing methods, material batches, and fatigue parameters used in the simulators were analyzed. Most alarming was that the patterns of unstable behavior caused by the damaged piece were not limited to Brazil. Once the data was revealed, the engineers began to reinterpret the information from the previous races. And what they found was worrying. Anomalous lateral load curves in Canada, unjustified slippage at the Netherlands GP, and out-of-range temperature records in certain components of the hydraulic system in Belgium. All of this had at the time been attributed to external conditions or piloting errors, but now it seemed to have a common technical root. In that instant, Ferrari realized that they had been flying blind for weeks. Ferrari's concern after Brazil was not only Hamilton's retirement. It was the real possibility that the entire SF-25 project was sitting on a broken piece. And that at this level of competition is the kind of revelation that can change the course of an entire championship. What happened in Brazil was not simply an anecdote within the Formula One calendar. It was a profound, almost symbolic blow, which exposed an uncomfortable truth for Ferrari. It is not enough to have talent behind the wheel, nor a polished strategy on the wall. If the car fails at its structural core, everything else falls apart. Leave me your opinion in the comments, what you think about all this.